Shabbat Shalom. Judgment Day is upon us. When is the Judgment Day on our calendar? Rosh Hashanah, Yom Hadin, the Day of Judgment. And uNatan HaTokef, one of the most famous prayers that is unique to our high holiday service, imagines it a little bit like, like being a sheep. Imagine that you are a sheep in a giant field, and the shepherd, God, is making you pass beneath his staff. And as each sheep goes under, the shepherd assesses. This one continues to the green pastures. This one goes to the shearing pen. And this one, well, let's just say that he's going to be tasty. That each sheep walks under that staff, is measured, is counted, and its fate is decided. But uNatan HaTokef does not finish with that particular passage, even as it outlines who will live, who will die, who by fire, who by water, going through all the different permutations that might happen in the year to come. It offers one of the most powerful and well sung by our congregation sections of Tefillah. uTeshuva Tefillah, uTzedakah, ma'arvirin et roa hagezera. That Teshuva, tzedakah, and tefillah, sorry, I flipped the two there in the middle, they can, well, not exactly mivatel, not nullify the harsh decree, but that it can postpone, skip, somehow mitigate the harshness of the decree. Now, if you are a sheep, you'd probably be pretty happy about that, because for most sheep, whatever the shepherd dictates for them is pretty much what they're stuck with. But God is telling us as human beings, we're not stuck with the fate that seems to be inevitable. There is no such thing as inevitable fate in Judaism. Instead, there are always things that we can do to mitigate whatever our current course may be leading us towards. Teshuvah, tefillah, tzedakah. Tzedakah, the giving of charity, of support of others. Are we saying that we can buy our way out of a harsh decree? Sounds a little bit like the indulgences of the Middle Ages. Tefillah, prayer. Are we saying that we can pray our way out of a harsh decree? Just imagine, if you will, for me, that you are the sheep that is guilty of, let's say, car theft. You know, sheep can be pretty rambunctious. Can you get away from the guilt simply by writing a big enough check? Can you get away from the guilt simply by praying hard enough about whatever? We're going to have to come back to those two topics over the next 2 weeks. But I want to focus today on the first word of our list, teshuvah, a word that really is quite hard to capture in English properly. It usually gets translated as repentance. Repentance, like many religious terms that are found in English, is heavily laden with Christological overtones. So we need to understand it more as tshuva rather than as repentance. We have to understand it by our terms, not by the, shall we say, compromised language of English when it comes to religion. What is teshuvah? A return. Or more specifically, not a return, that would be a choser, to come back, but a teshuvah is a turn, not a return, but just a turning, like turning to the left, turning to the right. Doesn't mean that you are necessarily going back, it means you are turning. However, the turning back motif is often used because teshuvah means we are turning in a particular direction. We are turning towards God, that we are turning towards the right path, that we are turning towards the direction that we should be heading towards, which of course implies that until we do teshuvah, which direction are we facing? The wrong way, right? By its very definition, the idea of turning reminds us that until we turn, we are pointed the wrong direction. And teshuvah may be the easiest part to understand of uNatan HaTokef's trilogy of solutions to our bad decree, because on a simplistic level, if we are walking towards the edge of a cliff and we turn, then my fate of falling off the cliff has been avoided. It seems very, very simple and straightforward. Yes, turn. Because it's really just that easy, right? Teshuvah just means turning. It just means reorientating yourself. It just means pointing in the right direction. And if it was that easy, everyone would be doing it. In Judaism, we talk about a complete teshuvah, not about the, shall we say, half-hearted or tentative teshuvah, but full teshuvah. And full teshuvah requires a few different elements. It requires, first and foremost, we admit our mistake. That is probably the hardest thing for most of us to do. Oftentimes, we will want to admit that we are unhappy with the result of our action, but to admit that the action we took was, in and of itself, regardless of the consequences, a mistake, that's tricky. That's tricky. We regret the punishment more than we regret the error. But teshuvah, to be full teshuvah, has to begin and contain the concept of true regret. That what we did was wrong. When we are willing to admit that, then we have to actually begin to admit something else, which is that we won't do it again. To admit we did it, to admit that it's wrong, and then to admit, or rather commit, that we will no longer pursue that path. And that last one may seem obvious. After all, if you know what's wrong, and you regret what's wrong, how would you ever possibly do that thing again? I don't need a show of hands, but all of us, I'm sure, have had moments of deep and bitter and powerful regret, and we ended up doing the same thing again. And then we walk away going, why did I do that again? I don't understand. What's wrong with me? Well, nothing's wrong with you. You're human. This is the way the human body, the human mind, the human psyche, the human soul works. It is not so easy to change path simply by intellectually acknowledging that, yes, this was wrong, and this, oh, I really wish I hadn't done that, and I won't do it again. Wait, why am I still walking towards the cliff? It turns out that human behavior is harder to change than simply wishing it to be so. And so teshuvah, as the concept of repentance often gets made to sound, is not just wishing that I don't do something, not just hoping that I don't. It is a statement of belief in my ability to, through hard work and continuous effort, begin the process of changing my direction. By admitting the mistake, by regretting the mistake, we are laying down markers. But those markers by themselves are not enough. Teshuvah in Judaism means that we actually take steps to change direction. If you regret the way you treated someone else, you need to take steps to fix that treatment and to prevent it from occurring again. If you regret the way that you behaved in your work, at your job, perhaps you acknowledge that you've shortchanged your employer or customers. It's not merely enough to regret that you have done so. You must place markers on the table before you to say, and I will not do X, Y, and Z again because I know that if I do them, it will lead to that same conclusion. Teshuvah is not something that happens just from willpower. It is not something that happens just from the desire to change. It begins with that desire and acknowledgement, but it must be continually reinforced with action. Teshuvah is not merely a state of mind, it is a state of behavior, and one that has to be continually reinforced. And if we do, well, then we are no longer sheep. We are no longer walking in the direction that we were walking as a mindless machine turning grass into mutton. We are a creature of free will and choice, still making mistakes, still moving often by inertia rather than by intent, but able to adjust that course, able to tact a little bit one way or the other. And when we begin to turn, when we begin to actually take steps that lead us in a different direction, it can become self-reinforcing. Once we recognize that it's within our capability of turning, once we recognize that small steps can help us, then we take braver steps, bigger changes, bolder action that allows us to move in the direction that we wish. This is ultimately the promise of Teshuvah. This is ultimately why it is at the top of the list for the three things that can help us to avoid the harshness of a decree, because it is the one that most powerfully produces an effect of moving us away from the catastrophe of our own making. It's not easy. Anyone who tells you that all you have to do is want to change and you'll change is usually trying to sell you something. But knowing that you can, and that what you want to do is an important aspect of effecting that change, that must be continually reminded and held in our heart. We are the masters of our destiny. We are the writers of our book. We are the authors of our fate. But you have to remember that you are picking the ending. Shabbat Shalom.